Today's scripture lesson comes to us from the Gospel according to Luke. It is a parable and an admonishment from Jesus. They go hand in hand with one another. Hear these words, starting in chapter 12, verse 13, and I'll be reading through verse 34. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." And he said to him, "Friend, who set me up to be a judge or an arbitrary over you?" And he said to them, "Take care, be on guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist of abundance of possessions." And then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do, for I have no place to store all my crops?" And then he said, "I'll do this. I will pull down my barns, I will build larger ones, and there I will store my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich towards God.' And he said to his disciples, 'Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, and what about your body, and what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Consider the ravens, they neither sow nor reap, and neither do they have storehouses nor barns, yet God feeds them. And how much more value are you than the birds? And can you, by worrying, add a single hour to the span of your life? If then you are able to do small things like that, why do you worry about the rest? Consider the lilies and how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. But if God clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into an oven, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? Do not keep striving for things that you eat and what you are going to drink, and do not keep worrying. For let the nations of the world strive for all these things. Your Father knows what you need. Instead, strive for his kingdom, and these things shall be given to you. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, unfailing treasure in heaven. There is where no thief can come near, nor moth destroy. For where your treasure is, your heart will be also." It starts at an early age, I'll tell you. You can see it among children. These are my toys. Don't look out my window. And our favorite as a family was when the kids were getting just kind of being crazy, we'd go, "Stop breathing my air." I always thought that, anyone who's grown up in a family of more than yourself has encountered sibling rivalry. It's just endemic to being a part of a family where you have something that your brother or sister have that you just need to get. And they, like the great warrior they are going to protect that at all costs. And at some point, the arbitrator has to come in the room, normally a parent, and tell Johnny or Sally or whatever name it is attached to it, you need to share with your brother or sister. These are a sentence that no child wants to really hear because the possession is very important. It sets us of who we are, and our stuff is stuff we need. It can expand throughout one's life, can't it? We talk about greed always in negative terms. The great story of Christmas of Scrooge and his greed. It becomes an example for all of us, of how to live a life that's more flourishing than holding on desperately at the end. And yet, greed is in some ways is praised in our world. We think of the titans of business who have amassed great fortunes because they're smarter than the rest of us. And the reason that people never want to change any lottery laws is because they just know that could be them someday. And that if I had all this money, I would be much more benevolent than these poor folks, and God should give it to me because of my benevolence. We make all kinds of deals with others, with God, with ourselves, that if we, and somehow the heavens opened up and we were showered with riches, we would be different than the rest. This story today, the parable in particular, well, the story starts out really with sibling rivalry, doesn't it? Where someone calls up to Jesus and said, "You need to tell my brother to divide the family fortune fairly." Now, in the ancient Near East, the older sibling got the share, and therefore it was really up to his own benevolence to give something to his siblings. And this person felt that he wasn't going to get what he really deserved. And I've heard this story repeated throughout my career, where one person in the family, a child, takes care of the parent while another one's far away, and then when the parent dies, there's a feeling that there's a great deserve, because I deserve more because I was there for that person. And yet the parent who feels like, well, I need to be just and to equal to others, divides things in half, and then one leaves feeling like they've been not seen, or the care that they were given was not recompensed through money. It's an interesting thing, though, that I have found, is that we use monetary reward oftentimes as a fulcrum for love. That we see ourselves as being giving and benevolent and caring and all these other things. But if we aren't a part of the dividing of the estate, somehow we feel slighted by that, that we weren't noticed, or the care that we gave is not appreciated. It becomes this kind of weighing out of do I give myself over fully to this, and if I do I get something back for it? It's a transactional statement. And so the parable is a transaction in some way. The person who has an abundant field has a quandary to do. What do I do with my excess? Now the difference is that he claims all of that labor and all of that excess as his own, as if he made it all happen by himself magically. If he owned fields, he had laborers who worked in it. What about the laborers? Do they count in this? We don't know. But it's my fields, my barns, my treasure store. And then his response in the parable is, it's all good for me. I can eat, drink, and be merry, and I don't have to worry about the world outside. It is fine with me. And then we have the recompense at the end, with God calling him a fool, and then who will get your abundance? It is juxtaposed to the question afterward that Jesus talks to his disciples about worrying. It's an interesting thing, because these are people who have given up a lot to follow Jesus, and I think they were probably worried about where the next meal was going to come from and how they were going to make it through. And Jesus says, what Jesus says is interesting to me, because it's not Pollyannish. It says, don't worry about tomorrow. It's okay. It'll all work out at the end. He doesn't say that at all. But what he does do is he acknowledges that the anxiety that they're feeling is a drag upon their soul. And anxiety is a drag upon your soul. I don't know how many nights I've woken up in the middle of the night just having to either get a drink of water or go to the bathroom or something, and then lay down again in bed, and then spend an hour and a half thinking about all the possibilities of things that could go wrong with the world. Early on in our career at the church, we were barely making it financially, and I would just worry about how we were going to get it all together and how we were going to make it work for ourselves, and I'd spend all this time creating these scenarios that would never come about, but I would be going around and around and around in a circle. All of us have woken up at some point in our lives with a problem that just causes us to do a circle. We're walking around the room several times in our head, and we're trying to find some reconciliation to this problem that we have, but we continue to make a deeper and deeper path as we just repeat over and over and over again. It can be a whole bunch of things. It can be our jobs, it can be our family, it could be even our self-worth, where we're thinking about, I'm not really getting what I need, or I don't deserve what I have, or it could be all kinds of things that as we wear ourselves down with thoughts that repeat themselves over and over and over again. Some people just kind of throw it up in the air and say, well, it'll be okay because God's taking care of me, therefore I don't really need to worry about it. It's in God's plan that I will be taken care of, and I'm just not going to worry. But that's really shortchanging ourselves in a lot of ways. Because, sometimes it doesn't work out. And sometimes it doesn't go what you think it's going to go like. And sometimes you really suffer through living. And where's God in there? If we have this plan that it's all going to work out because God somehow has control of everything in our lives and we don't have to think about it, where is God in that? Is God just kind of abandoning us? Does God say, well, I'll have other things to do. You're on your own. That's not what Jesus is trying to express in this idea of anxiety in the way and building up treasures in heaven. What Jesus is trying to express in that is that God does not abandon us in this process. If God can care for the ravens and the flowers of the field, then God cares for us too. It may not work out the way that we envision it to go. And bad things do happen. We don't get a pass on that because of our faith. But what we do get with it is the idea that God's caring can sustain us. And I'm not talking about sustain us in a monetary way or sustain us like averting tragedy in life. Having God's care doesn't necessarily mean you won't get cancer or you won't lose your job or things won't go the way that you want them to go and that you will have to suffer. That is not what God's care is about. God's care is about you are not abandoned to yourself. You are not alone in the universe. You are not the only being out there, existential abandonment. But God has brought people into your life who care for you, and that God's own caring is made evident in the world around us. Too often we sell ourselves short and say that, we stand against the wind on our own. We don't have, we have to be tough to manage life. And it's true, in a lot of ways you do have to show resilience to life to go forward. But it's a fallacy to say that we all live on our own and that we don't rely on others to make things happen. Like the man in the parable, the first parable, he just completely ignored all the other people that made life happen for him. The laborers in the field, the people who built the barns, all the other things that were going on there. And he just thought of it, this is my world and I'm going to create it the way I want. The ignoring of others is really the hallmark of greed. When you think about it, if you think about a person and your idea of greed, they are ignoring others for the sake of only themselves. And all the people that are around them are just pawns to make their life more rich and better. I read an article today about the pandemic and the top 0.5% of our population who have become rich got even richer during the pandemic, which is amazing to me. They almost made enough in the pandemic to pay for the latest bill that went through Congress to help the poor. They made enough in profits over the last year to basically pay for all the social programs that have gone out in the last bill that went past Congress. Pretty amazing. They did nothing. They just had enough resource to have it invested in places where it made money, and it was great. Look how smart I am. And it completely ignores all the other people in the equation who labored for that, who made those things happen, who worked for those companies, who invested that money for everything else to make that happen. Greed doesn't see anyone but themselves. Anxiety only sees oneself. They're mirror reflections of one another. The only way that we can get out of the cycle of greed and the cycle of anxiety is to see that we're not alone in this together. That there are other people who benefit from our benevolence, and that we are not the only ones sitting in a hole that is worried about ourselves. We have to be more inclusive than the sole self. It's important for us as Christians to realize that we are not in this alone. The lessons of Jesus' life and saying again and again point to a type of fellowship and a type of community that says that we are in this together. That God has created us as beings in this world to care for the world around us, that we are in the midst of creation and we can't ignore it. We are a group of people who have been created in community, and therefore we need to care for the community that we are a part of, and we need to sustain it and make it a better place. Salvation is not solely an individual act. It is an act of community. It creates a bigger space for people to be belonged to and to join and to be sustained by. And as long as we live in a world that says that you are the top, that you are most important, that you are the pinnacle, you will miss that community and you'll miss out on the glory that God has for you this day. Christ has called us to be greater than ourselves. Christ has called us to care for the world around us. Christ has called us to be a part of a community that is transforming. Christ is calling you to that today. Will you pray with me? Call us, God, beyond our greed, beyond our anxiety, into a new way of living, knowing that we are not in this alone, and that your care extends beyond ourselves to others, and that we, like the whole of creation, are journeying through this life together, knowing that you will sustain us and provide for us. Amen.